My name is Julianne Cross, and I can still remember the exact shade of the velvet cushion on the chair my mother refused to pull out for me. That chair sat proudly on the front row at my sister's award ceremony. Glossy wood, polished arms, and my name missing from the place card. They claimed it was a mistake, but I had long stopped believing in accidents where I was concerned. Growing up in Cedar Valley, a small town nestled in the lazy sprawl of Northern Virginia, I learned very early that being the second daughter meant being the second thought. My older sister Camilla was golden from birth. Literally flaxen hair, perfect grades, and a smile that could make teachers swoon and neighbors gossip with pride. I, on the other hand, was a storm. Quiet, observant, always sketching in the margins of notebooks instead of rehearsing piano pieces or reciting poems. My parents, Marilyn and Douglas Cross, never said I was a disappointment. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than any insult could have been. When Camilla got accepted into an elite arts academy at 13, we had a full garden party. When I won first place in a regional design competition in high school, an award that came with a $5,000 scholarship, they forgot to show up. "Sweetie, we thought that was just a local thing," Mom had said casually when I brought it up. Camilla's audition was more time-sensitive. I learned to eat their indifference like dry bread. Swallow it, digest it, and carry on. But the moment that changed everything, that came later at the graduation ceremony Camilla was the star of. I was 24, freshly returned from a brutal internship in Chicago where I'd lived off instant noodles and hope. Camilla was being honored as the rising star in theater arts, and the whole Cross family was out in celebratory force. I had RSVP'd months ago. I even booked my own flight and accommodations. And yet, as I approached the row reserved for family, there was no seat for me. My mother glanced up, surprised but not apologetic. "Oh, Julianne, I thought you said you weren't sure if you could make it," she whispered, eyes already darting toward the stage. "Maybe see if someone in the back can bring you a chair?" A chair. In the back. For me. I didn't cry. Not then. I stood still in my heels, heart cracking just enough to let the cold seep in. I watched them, clapping, beaming, hugging, while I stood like a stranger who had accidentally crashed someone else's celebration. That night, in a hotel room paid for with what little freelance money I had left, I made a decision. One they would never see coming. They wanted a golden daughter? I'd become something rarer than gold. I'd build a legacy so undeniable, so blindingly brilliant, that even those velvet chairs would feel unworthy to hold me. They underestimated me for the last time. Back home in my tiny studio apartment, the kind where the kitchen sink was practically in the bedroom, I looked around at the mess of deadlines, design drafts, and empty ramen cups and knew I had to break the pattern. Not just in my family, but in myself. Camilla had applause handed to her. I would have to build mine from the silence. I was freelancing for small marketing firms then. Patchy gigs, inconsistent clients, late invoices. Nothing glamorous. But I had grit and I had ideas. While Camilla chased standing ovations in theaters, I started sketching brand identities, building websites, and quietly collecting experience. Every rejection taught me something. Every "not right now" from a potential client became fuel. Then one evening, while scrolling through a stale list of design forums, I saw a post. Looking for a branding strategist to overhaul a national campaign. Budget, generous. Timeline, tight. Heart required. Something about that last part, heart required, stopped me cold. Without hesitating, I clicked apply. I attached my scrappiest, most honest portfolio and wrote a cover letter that read more like a confession than a pitch. 3 days later, I got the email. "We'd like to meet with you. Tomorrow. Zoom. Noon." I barely slept that night. My laptop camera was scratched, and my Wi-Fi had a habit of flickering out mid-sentence. I set up every backup possible. Coffee brewed. Hair tied. Notes taped to the wall behind the screen. Their company was Lark and Finch, an eco-conscious home goods brand on the verge of scaling nationally. They needed a new direction and fast. I didn't pretend to have all the answers, but I spoke from the gut. Told them how their existing branding felt cold, how they needed to evoke not just style, but comfort, memory, belonging, things I'd craved most of my life. The silence after I finished felt like another empty velvet chair. Then one of the founders leaned forward and said, "You just described exactly what we couldn't articulate. When can you start?" I started that night. For 6 months, I poured everything into that campaign. Worked from coffee shops, under flickering light bulbs, even from hospital waiting rooms while visiting a sick friend. And when the campaign finally launched featuring my visuals, my strategy, and my voice, it went viral. Lark and Finch became a case study in every branding blog. Industry leaders reached out. I was invited to speak at a virtual summit, me, the girl who once watched her sister win awards while clapping quietly in the shadows. But the true shift wasn't the fame. It was the validation, not from the world, but from myself. That I had a voice. That I wasn't just Camilla's quiet sister. I was Julianne Cross, and I was building an empire. Still, not a single word from my parents. Not a single "we're proud of you" text. Not even a "saw your name in the news" call. But that was fine. Because this time, I didn't need a seat in their row. I was building a room of my own, and the applause would come. I never expected Camilla to call. It had been almost a year since the velvet chair incident. A year since I decided to carve my own place in the world without asking for their permission or presence. By then, I had signed 2 more high-profile clients. My name was starting to circulate in small, influential circles. Nothing flashy. Just a quiet buzz that people in the know had started to pay attention to. So when my phone lit up with her name, Camilla Cross, on a rainy Thursday night, I froze. I let it ring out the first time. The second time, I answered. "Julianne." Her voice was breathy, lighter than I remembered, but laced with hesitation. "Yes." I didn't bother disguising the edge in my voice. There was a pause, as if she was gathering the courage to ask me for something, and I already knew that's exactly what it was. I was wondering if you're still doing those branding campaigns," she finally said. "I've started my own theater collective. It's small, but I want to pitch it for funding. I need help telling the story, I guess." I nearly laughed. Not because she needed help, but because she was asking me. Me, the invisible sister. The placeholder. The one who never got a seat. And now, the golden girl needed my voice. "I thought you had a publicist," I said flatly. "I did," she replied. But she didn't get it. "You will. I know you will." Something about that last part twisted something inside me. Not quite flattery, more like guilt disguised as sentiment. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small in her presence. I felt like the sun she had no idea could burn. I agreed to meet, not because I owed her, but because I was curious. Curious to see who she was without the spotlight fixed on her face. We met at a cafe in the Arts District. She arrived dressed in a flowing coat, looking effortlessly elegant. But there were cracks, shadows beneath her eyes, a nervous tug at the napkin in her lap. "Why no?" I asked her after she explained the basics of her new theater group. "You never needed me before." She looked up, her expression suddenly fragile. "I didn't know I needed you until everything started falling apart. No one showing up, Jules. I thought my name would carry weight, but turns out being talented isn't enough anymore. People want depth, purpose, and I don't know how to sell that." I studied her, the sister who once floated above the rest of us on clouds of approval. And I realized, for the first time, she was falling. "I'll help," I said. "But not for you. For the story. If it's worth telling, I'll find the voice." She blinked, clearly not expecting me to play it cold. But that was the thing about growth. I had learned boundaries. And I had learned not to hand over my time or talent to people who wouldn't value it. Camilla didn't know it yet, but this wasn't a favor. This was the beginning of something else. Something sharper. She had always been the favorite. But now, she was learning what it felt like to need the sister they always overlooked. And I intended to make sure she never forgot it. Camilla handed me a thick folder the next time we met. "These are our notes, sketches, some concepts for the collective's name," she said with a hopeful smile, like we were just 2 sisters collaborating on a dream. But the folder was a mess. Disjointed ideas. A mission statement that read like it had been scraped from an Instagram caption. A tagline that might have worked for a perfume ad, not a theater company. It wasn't just underdeveloped, it was hollow. All shine, no soul. I read through it quietly while she stirred her coffee, tapping her spoon like she was waiting for applause. "I'll be honest," I finally said. "This isn't a story yet. It's a scrapbook of pretty phrases. You've got talent, but no direction." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "So, you're saying no?" "I'm saying I'll have to rebuild it from scratch if you want it to work." The edge in my voice caught her off guard. She blinked, then forced a small laugh. "You've gotten tougher." I met her gaze. "Or maybe you've just never seen me clearly before." She didn't argue, just nodded slowly and murmured, "Okay, do what you have to." So I did. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked with the precision of a woman on a mission, because I was. I didn't just create a brand for Camilla's collective. I created a vision. I built the kind of narrative I would have killed to be part of, bold, inclusive, built on grit and vulnerability. I called it the unscripted stage, a name that captured everything Camilla's version lacked: authenticity. But here's the twist. I didn't tell her I'd restructured the presentation to feature our story, mine and hers, as part of the pitch. I crafted the origin story around the invisible sister, the one who'd learned to find her own voice, and then gave that voice to others who never had a stage. It wasn't spite. It was poetic justice. Because for once, Camilla's spotlight came with a shadow, mine. And this time, I wasn't stepping out of the frame. When the funding pitch was finally ready, I sent her the finished presentation deck. She opened it while we were on a Zoom call, expecting the usual glossy branding. But instead, the first slide read, "Every spotlight casts a shadow sometimes. That shadow learns to shine brighter." She read it out loud, then paused. "This is about us," she said slowly. I didn't blink. "Yes, it is." And for the first time, she didn't push back, didn't flinch. She just whispered, "It's beautiful." Her voice was barely audible, but the weight of the moment sat thick between us. For the first time, Camilla was starring in a story she hadn't written. And I wasn't a side character anymore. The night of the funding gala felt surreal. It wasn't just a pitch event, it was a gathering of elite donors, press, local artists, and theater board members. Camilla had somehow secured a coveted slot in the lineup of presenters. And by she, I mean we. Because she was presenting my work, wrapped in her name. But that was part of the plan. Let her shine. Let her speak. The words were still mine. I arrived separately. Camilla had wanted us to walk in together, but I preferred to come as a guest, to observe, to measure the shift in power I had orchestrated. As I stepped into the venue, a restored opera house with golden chandeliers and velvet drapes, I spotted Camilla across the room. She was surrounded by a group of sponsors, laughing her melodic laugh, the kind that once felt like music but now sounded rehearsed. Then she saw me. For the briefest moment, her smile faltered. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe she realized she wasn't the only lead in the room anymore. She waved me over and introduced me to the group. "This is Julianne," she said, "the creative director behind the unscripted stage." There it was. Acknowledgement. Public. Clear. For a second, I almost believed she'd changed. We took our seats at the long candlelit table near the front. Across from us sat the founder of a major arts foundation, a woman named Patricia Hensley. Powerful. Sharp. Known for her no-nonsense demeanor. "You're the writer?" Patricia asked me, cutting through small talk like a blade. I nodded. "I am." "I read your opening statement," she said. "The bit about shadows learning to shine, that was you, wasn't it?" I simply said yes. Patricia leaned in. "That's why I'm here. That sentence got me out of bed tonight." Camilla blinked, clearly caught off guard. But I wasn't. Because I had written those words for people like Patricia. For women who had been made small in large rooms. For those of us who were never offered a seat, so we built our own damn tables. When it was time for the pitch, Camilla took the stage. Her voice was smooth, her presence magnetic. But her script was mine. And as she spoke, I watched the audience react, nodding, leaning forward, hanging on every line. Lines I had bled for. Lines born from years of being overlooked. And then, as if fate had a wicked sense of timing, Camilla deviated from the script. She looked up from her notes and said, "Before I close, I want to acknowledge someone. Someone whose story shaped this collective. Someone who helped me find my voice again. I froze. "Julianne," she said, scanning the crowd. "Please stand." A spotlight turned. Found me. And just like that, everyone stood, applauding. I wasn't prepared for the rush of emotion. The heat behind my eyes. The vindication. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just part of someone else's story. I was the story. The standing ovation echoed long after the last clap died down. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed every moment. The spotlight, Camilla's unexpected acknowledgement, the way strangers looked at me like I mattered. And for once, it didn't feel borrowed or accidental. It felt earned. But I also knew better than to trust applause, especially when it came from Camilla. The next morning, she called. "I hope you know how proud I am," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "That moment was as much yours as it was mine." I didn't say anything at first. Then I asked, "Why did you do it?" "What do you mean?" "The recognition. The standing ovation. That was your big moment. Why share it?" Camilla paused, then gave the kind of answer I'd come to expect from her. "Because I want people to know who we are, together. We, together." That word again. She always loved to use it when she needed something: validation, loyalty, forgiveness. But she never lived it. Not really. Still, I played along. Because I had something she didn't: patience. The next few months were a whirlwind. After the gala, the unscripted stage took off. We got our funding. Our social media grew. Local press started covering our performances. Camilla became the face of it all, but I was the architect behind the curtain. We staged our first play, Undone, based loosely on my journals from childhood. A story about a girl raised in the shadows of perfection. The audience cried. Donors lined up. Camilla gave every interview. I wrote every line. And then came the feature article. A prominent online arts publication requested a profile on the duo behind the city's newest feminist theater revolution. They interviewed both of us, together and separately. I told my truth, my journey, my pain and my perseverance. Camilla, apparently, told hers too. Only when the article came out. My name was barely mentioned. She'd edited the narrative again. I sat at my laptop, staring at the headline. Camilla Rhodes, the visionary behind the unscripted stage. The writer quoted her as saying, "I always knew I wanted to give voice to the unheard." I just had to find the right story to tell. The right story. My story. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't confront her. I just smiled. Because I finally understood. Camilla wasn't malicious. She was incapable of seeing anyone's light but her own. Even if it warmed her. Even if it saved her. Even if it was mine. She thought she'd silenced me again. But I was just getting started. I stopped answering Camilla's calls. Not suddenly, that would have raised alarms. No, I let it taper off. I replied with short texts, took longer to respond, missed a few planning meetings. She noticed, of course. Camilla always noticed when attention started slipping away from her. But she didn't worry. Not really. Because she still believed I needed her. What she didn't know is that I had already begun building my own stage. Literally. I signed a lease on a small space in the warehouse district. It wasn't much: exposed brick, cracked floorboards, peeling paint, but it had good bones. And more importantly, it was mine. No shared spotlight. No one else's shadow. Just a space where stories like mine could live and breathe and scream if they needed to. I called it the second draft, a place for women to reclaim their own narratives. I didn't announce it yet. That would come later. Quiet moves first. Let Camilla keep basking in her curated glory while I laid the groundwork for something real, something permanent. I began reaching out to women I'd worked with at the unscripted stage. Lighting assistants, costume artists, understudies, the ones Camilla had dismissed as replaceable. I offered them contracts, shares, and most importantly, creative control. One by one, they joined me. Some out of loyalty, some out of frustration. All because they'd felt invisible too. Meanwhile, Camilla kept soaring. She gave a TEDx talk. She signed with a talent manager. She even made a podcast episode titled, "The Power of Storytelling, A Director's Journey." And through it all, she never once mentioned my name again. It was as if she'd erased me. But I didn't need her acknowledgement anymore. Because I had something far more powerful now, a growing community, a building of my own, and a plan. Still, part of me wondered if she suspected. If she sensed the storm quietly brewing beneath her feet. That question was answered one afternoon when I received an email. No greeting. No sign-off. Just 2 lines. So this is what you've been doing behind my back. You think you can just take everything we built. She'd found out. It was sooner than I'd planned. But maybe the timing was perfect. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one caught off guard. I opened my calendar, moved up the launch date, and hit send on a press release I'd been perfecting for weeks. The second draft, a new theater space dedicated to rewriting women's stories, opening night this fall. I didn't need to steal Camilla's spotlight. I was about to build my own damn sun. Opening night came faster than I expected. The second draft was finally alive, raw, intimate, electric. It didn't have the polished gleam of Camilla's productions, but it breathed differently. Honestly. Truthfully. I stood backstage in black jeans and a headset, watching the audience trickle in, not donors or socialites this time, but women. Real women. Young, old, tired, fierce. Survivors. Dreamers. Writers. Some came alone, others in pairs, clutching the little folded programs we had printed ourselves. Every seat was filled. And yet, I only searched for one face. She arrived 5 minutes before the show. Of course she did. Camilla. She wore red, bold, dramatic, predictable. She sat in the back row, arms crossed, chin lifted. Her expression unreadable. But her eyes scanned everything, the lights, the crowd, the stage that wasn't hers. And then the lights dimmed. The first spotlight hit the center of the small black box theater. A single actress stepped forward. She wore no makeup, no costume. Just her voice and the silence wrapped around it. She began the monologue, my monologue. My sister always knew how to fill a room. I only knew how to watch. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the story unfolded, the tale of 2 sisters, one born into brilliance, the other into silence. Of how that silence became strength. Of how erasure bred clarity. Of how betrayal sharpened the blade of truth. Each word hit like a heartbeat. Camilla never flinched. But I knew she was listening. Because for once, she wasn't in control of the narrative. I was. The play ended not with applause, but with stillness. A silence so heavy, it pulsed with meaning. Then, someone stood. A young woman near the front. She clapped. Slowly. Purposefully. Others followed. Within moments, the room exploded into applause. Not for the stage design. Not for the production value. But for the story. For the truth. I stepped out only when the cast waved me forward. And then it happened. The audience stood. All of them. Camilla didn't. She sat frozen, her eyes locked on mine. There was no rage in her expression. No contempt. Only recognition. For the first time in our lives, she saw me. Not the tag-along little sister. Not the backstage helper. Not a threat. A peer. Maybe even something more. I nodded once. She didn't nod back. She simply stood quietly, slowly, and walked out the door. The curtain fell. But my story was just beginning. I didn't hear from Camilla after opening night. Not the next day or the week after. Not a congratulatory text. Not a bitter email. Not even one of her signature passive-aggressive social posts. Just silence. And that silence, it was louder than applause. I spent the following weeks drowning in work. The second draft had become something bigger than me. The play was extended. Community organizations reached out to collaborate. Grants came in. Writers submitted new stories, raw, unfiltered, powerful. Women who had never dared to speak now had a place to stand and be heard. Still, a quiet ache lingered. I had wanted her to hate it, to scream, to compete. Instead, she vanished. One late evening, after a post-performance talkback, I returned to my office to find a single manila envelope on my desk. No name, no note, just my handwriting on the outside. I recognized the curves of every letter. They were mine. Inside were the letters I'd written to Camilla over the years, never sent. Notes I'd tucked away in journals, venting the hurt, the confusion, the longing. Why do you always look through me? Do you know how badly I wanted to be like you? Do you remember telling Mom I stole your ideas when I didn't? Why am I never enough for you? She had found them. She had read them. And somehow returned them. My hands trembled as I flipped through each one. The oldest dated back to high school. The newest, just months before our theater launch. At the bottom of the envelope, there was one addition, a note on her personal stationery, folded neatly. It said, "You were never the shadow. I just wasn't brave enough to share the light. This was never your fault." See, I didn't cry. I thought I would. But instead, I felt a kind of stillness settle inside me. Like the closing of a chapter. She hadn't said, "I'm sorry." Not directly. But maybe she didn't need to. Maybe I no longer needed it. The following day, I went to her old office. The space was empty. Cleared out. Someone said she had taken a position across the country, something low profile, somewhere quiet. A retreat, perhaps. I left one letter behind. Just one. It read, "You were right. I was never the shadow. I was the story. Goodbye, Camilla." And with that, I turned the page for the final act of my life. One she wouldn't write. 6 months later, I stood under a spotlight once again, but this time, not as a playwright or a silent sister. This time, I was being honored. A National Women's Media Foundation had selected the second draft for its Voices of the Future award. Not because of its box office success, though we had sold out every show for 3 consecutive runs, but for what it represented, a space where forgotten women rewrote themselves into the world. I stood at the podium, looking out at a ballroom filled with publishers, filmmakers, survivors, dreamers, and my cast and crew, now family. I adjusted the mic, smiled gently, and began. I used to believe I wasn't enough. Not talented enough. Not visible enough. Not worthy enough. Until one day I realized I wasn't born to be seen by someone else. I was born to see myself clearly, boldly, without apology. Applause echoed across the room, but I wasn't finished. There was a time I stood in someone else's shadow and called it home. But shadows don't own the light, they only prove it's there. That night, as the cameras flashed and the crowd gathered for photos, a young intern approached me shyly. She looked barely 20. "Can I ask, how did you get over the betrayal?" The feeling of being erased? I looked at her, this girl with nervous hands and eyes full of fear and fire. "I didn't get over it," I said gently. "I wrote through it. And in doing so, I stopped needing their approval. I gave myself permission to be everything they said I wasn't." She smiled like she'd just been given a key. Maybe she had. Later that week, I sat alone in my apartment, the old journal open, the letters tucked away in a drawer I no longer needed to open. I hadn't heard from Camilla since her last note, but I no longer hoped she'd reach out. The truth was, I had taken my pain and turned it into power. I had taken the silence and filled it with voice. I had taken the rejection and made it a stage. That was the revenge. Not revenge through cruelty or collapse or conquest, but through becoming undeniable. She used to be the favorite. But now, I was the name on the building. The name in the headlines. The name little girls whispered when they dreamed of taking center stage. Not as someone's sister. Not as a helper. But as the story itself. I closed my eyes that night, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. I had arrived. And I had done it without permission.